My friend Pringle found a great way to cheat. This guy knows a bit about electronics and he has photophobic eyes, which basically means that his eyes are super sensitive to light. And so he has to wear sunglasses a lot, even indoors, the cool guy. So for his final exam, he took a small, mildly flexible screen that he cannibalized from an old Nintendo DS, fit it into the inside of his right lens, and rigged it up to connect to his phone through a wire running down the earpiece and through his shirt, hidden by his hair. After finding a brightness that wouldn't destroy his eyes and a resolution he could read, he put all the formulas and notes on his phone and walked straight into class. Aside from the lack of depth perception, it went really well for him, even if it was needlessly complicated.
Spincess was playing an online game called Neverwinter. She would often go into the social area and see the same character around, but couldn't work up the courage to say hi. When she eventually worked up the nerve, he logged out just as she typed hi. She kept trying though, and on the third attempt, he replied. Both of them had just left their previous partners and initially didn't want to get into anything deep. But as time went on, they started to like each other more and more, and eventually he asked her out. Only one little problem. Spincess lived in Canada and he lived in the US. They video chatted for a few months while Spincess worked up the funds and organized the paperwork to go visit him. She planned to stay 3 months, but in the end used her full 6-month allowance. During those months together, Spincess worked up the courage and asked him to marry her. After 7 months of paperwork and interviews, she got her K-1 visa to re-enter the States and marry him. They just celebrated their first Valentine's Day as a married couple, and she loves him more than anything. Emoji got 2 cool pairs of socks that he knew his crush would like. The plan was to put them on her feet, Cinderella glass slipper style. But yeah, it was just awkward, and after showing her the socks and offering to slip them on her tootsies, he immediately felt weird about it.
One time I dated a woman who I thought I had some great chemistry with. We both had similar interests, goals, plans, and well, things were great. That is until one day where she just kind of went crazy. I can't explain what happened, but in the morning she texted me and all was great. I then went to work, I finished up a few hours later, I went to talk to her, and she just had gone insane. She started talking about how she was convinced that I was going to try to kill her, how her father was going to try to kill her, how all her friends were going to betray her and were planning to hurt her behind her back. And after hours of talking, she just hung up the call and disappeared. I have no idea what happened to her or where she is now.
Dolan had a doctor's appointment one morning and was late to school. For some reason, when he arrived, his classmates stared at him as though he'd killed someone. Dolan ignored it and gave the doctor's note to the teacher. He went to take a seat, but the teacher told him to stay in front of the class. The teacher handed Dolan a detention slip, despite having a doctor's note.
After Mikhailum became disinterested with his second girlfriend, he decided to ask his usually sarcastic and snarky friend Gergak for advice. Gergak told Mikhailum to dump her, but Mikhailum didn't know what that meant since he only experienced mutual breakups. Mikhailum asked Gergak about it, and Gergak gave back the snarky reply, "What do you think dump means?" Mikhailum, totally clueless, replied, "Taking a shit?" Gergak stared at him for a solid minute and replied, "Yes, just give her some shit and you'll be fine." Mikhailum did just that, and long story short, they didn't talk for a year after that.
Zaragamba was in 8th grade study hall when a loud commotion burst into his classroom. A circle of people formed around 2 kids. One of the kids was holding 2 erasers and started yelling, "Which damn eraser is mine? Which one?" The other kid then yells, "I don't know, asshole." Then they started punching and kicking each other. The teacher broke up the fight and both were suspended for 3 weeks. Zaragamba still laughs every time he thinks about it.
The weirdest food craving Ghost Host has ever had, and he was not high, he just loves trying new food and food combos, was a sandwich that had ham, deli thin turkey, roast beef, cheddar cheese, provolone cheese, lettuce, tomato, cream cheese, chocolate, a chocolate chip cookie, bacon, crunchy peanut butter, taco sauce, Wilshire sauce, honey, and barbecue sauce, all on wheat bread. Well, Ghost Toast thought it was amazing, but his family thought it was weird. I wonder why.
One day, Doopy and her friends were walking down the street when they saw a guy ahead of them acting weird. They all stopped as they watched the guy, who appeared to be in his 40s, run around and ask people to sniff his elbow. If someone refused, the guy would scream in their face before moving on. When the guy began to approach Doopy and her friends, they ran down the closest alley to avoid confronting him. They stayed there until he left. When Slaptam was 16, he started developing these weird cravings for sweetbreads. If you don't know what sweetbreads are, they're basically animal organs, particularly the pancreas or thymus of either calves or lambs. However, not long after he developed a craving, it had transformed into a full-fledged, awful craving. He would start craving and eating chicken hearts, gizzards, cow tongue, pork intestines, and even chicken brains on some occasion. He's yet to try bull testicles or yak penis, as his appetite for them hasn't spiked up at the moment. These cravings tend to spike up at least twice a month. How he even started a craving for sweetbreads is well beyond me.
When Zaragamba was a teenager, he was showing off trying to impress his brother Dolan's young friends. They thought Zaragamba was the coolest, so Zaragamba got a little carried away and told this inappropriate joke.
They say anal sex is like spinach. If you're forced to have it as a kid, you'll never enjoy it as an adult.
Dolan's friends found this hilarious, except for one, who went strangely quiet. Zaragamba later found out the reason for this. It turned out that kid had been sexually abused as a child, so the joke was a little too close to home for him. Zaragamba felt like a total asshole when he found this out.
One time when Mkalim was in a general store with his mum, he heard someone yelling at the person behind the counter to stop selling paper because it could be used as a murder weapon. Mkalim and his mum just ignored him. But that night, he ended up having a nightmare where someone slit his throat with a piece of paper. They went back the next day because they forgot to get milk, and the customer was still there. But this time he was yelling about them selling little fruit cups. For about a month, the man was in the store every time they went.
One day at school, Spinal Palm and his friends were goofing off at lunch. He wanted to act stupid and gain everyone's attention, so he slammed his head on an apple that was sitting on the table. It ended up splitting in half, and, soon after, the rest of the students at the table began doing it. It got to the point where they were all mashed apples everywhere, including the ceiling. The monitors made Spinal Palm sit at a different table. He reacted to the move by flipping his lunch tray and shouting,
Granny likes anal!
Civil Spider had been dating his girlfriend for about 4 months when he saw that they were sort of drifting apart. He asked her if she was okay and if she wanted to cool things down a bit and take some time apart. She didn't say that she didn't, that everything was fine and that she would talk to him the next day. The next day they hung out at lunch and everything seemed totally fine. But at the end of the day, on the way to the bus stop, she said that she was having some life problems and she wanted to break up. She said they could get back together in a month or so. Civil Spider didn't know what to say. When asked what her problems were, she simply said, homework. So her big life problem, the one that she broke up with Civil Spider over, was homework. 3 months later, they still haven't gotten back together.
When Dolan was 12, he had just seen a movie with his friend who got a ride home. But Dolan only lived about a mile away, so he decided to walk. On the way out of the parking area, he noticed a red truck next to him with the window rolled down. A middle-aged redneck looked down at him, studied him for a moment, and then he drove away. Dolan started to jog until he got to the part of the road where the sidewalk ended. It was only about 2 more miles, so he just decided to jog in the grass. About half a mile later, the red truck came up beside him, and the redneck looked at him, smiled, and said, "You shouldn't be out here, boy. Stuff happens." Then he threw his car door open and jumped at Dolan. Dolan screamed and jumped out of the way just in time and then sprinted towards his house for the rest of the mile. The man was behind him, honking the horn and calling out, "Boy!" Dolan got home, locked all the doors, and called the police, but they found no evidence of the man. Now Dolan always walks with a weapon in his pocket, such as a pencil or a small, hard-covered book.
Melissa and her siblings had to wait until they got married in order to drive. It was a weird rule her old parents had made. She had 7 siblings who were 5 years older than her, and none of them had a car. They had to rely on Uber drivers to get around. However, Melissa and her siblings had to hurry and catch the Uber driver. If they weren't in the Uber within 5 minutes after it arrived, then the driver would drive away. If that wasn't bad enough, Melissa's parents had another rule. They couldn't get married until they turned 24. Basically, Melissa and her siblings had to wait to get a car until they married someone.
I think every kid has gone through this, but my parents always advised me not to swallow watermelon seeds because a watermelon would grow in my stomach, and I was afraid that I was literally going to explode from a watermelon growing in my stomach. So I didn't swallow watermelon seeds for the longest time, and I was terrified of doing it. And if I had, just like that episode of Rugrats, I would freak out and cry and have nightmares. It was awful, absolutely awful. Don't do that to your kids. It's so mean. What's the point? What is the point?
So when I was a wee little hellbent, I wasn't that bad of a kid. At least I didn't steal anything. Sure, maybe I had a few accounts of vandalism, but common vandalism isn't that interesting. People get away with that every day. But my friend Pandora, she was a little kleptomaniac. Just a terrible, terrible, awful influence. So this is the scheme she had. We would go to the toy store and find some large item on discount, then buy it for like $2 or $3 so they'd give us a large bag. Then we would throw the cheap piece of shit away and ransack the entire mall. Anything without a security tag went into the bag. She must have gotten a little bit cocky one day because one of the employees noticed her and ratted her out. So here's where they screwed up. They took her back to the security office, but I was just left standing there with a bag full of loot. Knowing they would find nothing on her and then they'd come after me, I took the best course of action I could think of. I casually walked through several stores and stashed everything that I had in different aisles and sections and shelves. Because if I just dumped the bag or just left it somewhere, they would have found it all in one place and that would have implicated me. But since everything we snatched was scattered around the entire mall, they really couldn't find it. That would have been a near impossible scavenger hunt. So once they got done grilling Pandora, they snatched me up and tried to grill me too, but they couldn't find anything on us. So they took our pictures and banned us from the mall for a year. We went back the next day. They couldn't spot us out of the crowd at all. But here's the real funny part. Pandora actually got away with a couple of things. They didn't search her properly. She was pretty pissed that I gave up all that loot and didn't sneak anything out, but hey, none of us got in trouble. These days, she just steals my food from me when I'm not looking.
Spinal Palm was on a cruise ship in the Galapagos, and the staff and the tourists were having a party. After a cheesy play, they played some music, and people were dancing. Spinal Palm then saw his mom dancing with a pirate wearing an eye patch. They were doing the stupidest dance that he had ever seen. She then yelled for him and his little brother to come and dance with her. Unfortunately, there was a really cute girl on the boat, and Spinal Palm only got up and danced because he didn't want the girl to think he was a jerk. I've never really had a bad teacher, but man, when I was in college, I had one lazy English teacher. I remember we spent 3 weeks working on this 7-page essay, and I spent so long working on mine. I rewrote that thing so many times. I worked so hard on it. And you know what that teacher did? She was just like, you guys have all been working so hard, so you know what? Everybody gets an A. I was so angry, but I let it go. You know, whatever, who cares? But you know what? She did it again, and then she did it again. And then I came to the conclusion, this lady just doesn't want to grade papers. She's lazy, she's a piece of garbage, and I didn't like her. I was taking the class serious, and I was trying to learn, but she didn't care. The good news is from what I heard, she got fired. So that's good. That's good.
When Honeybits was little, her neighbor paid her $10 to sit in his front yard, dressed in a dog costume, and bark at anyone who tried to walk near his house. Not knowing any better, she sat there patiently all day, growling at everyone who passed by on the sidewalk. After about 20 minutes of growling at strangers, Honeybits heard police sirens howling from down the road. They began to get closer to the house, so she got on all fours and started barking. The commotion caused her parents to come out of their house to see what was going on. Her mother dragged Honeybits away as quickly as she could, and later explained that the neighbor was a drug dealer, and that he used her as a distraction to keep attention away from him as he loaded weed into his truck. He went to jail, and Honeybits made a hearty $10. So, all in all, a good day. Slapped Ham would slip a complete cheat sheet into the see-through flaps found on the front of most 3-ring binders. Sometimes he would use the other side of the binder as well. Then he would put the binder under his desk like his class was told to do, then put his head down like he was reading the questions. Slapped Ham would just read off the cheat sheet in between his feet, and it worked every time.
When me and my sister were little, we had 2 older twin sisters who would take care of us. We always called one the angel and one the devil because one was really nice and the other was a complete bitch. Normally she teased us and picked on us and would smack us around a bit and just be a bitch. But the worst thing that traumatized me and my sister was that she locked us in the closet for the entire time she babysat us while our parents went grocery shopping. And we were terrified of the vacuum cleaner in that closet, and she knew that, so she would sit against the door and just laugh while we screamed and cried on the other side. It was horrible.
About 2 years ago, Tulip was working a temp job as a bagger at a grocery store. And one day, this extremely fat woman in one of those motorized shopping carts came to the register where he was at. He didn't know how, but she somehow managed to fit a regular shopping cart's worth of food into the motorized cart's tiny basket. She handed him 2 reusable bags. The issue was after Tulip filled those 2 bags and started to put the rest of her food into a plastic bag. After he did that, she screamed, "What the hell are you doing?" He simply said,
Excuse me?
She then shouted, "Why aren't you using my bags?" He pointed out that there was no more room. She then gave him a glare like it was somehow his fault that the reusable bags had limited space. She then shouted, "Go away! I'll do it myself!" So Tulip let her, and guess what? She had to use the plastic bags.
Emoji School participated in lockdown drills. Locks were even put on every outer door and an alarm system was installed. One day, after a lockdown drill, a police officer came in to give them a lecture on being safe during a lockdown. The officer told them that if they were to find themselves in the hallways during a lockdown, they could not go to the bathrooms and hide. Instead, they would need to run to the safe spot, which was a restaurant 15 minutes away. Also, he told them not to bother calling the police because they wouldn't care and had other important things to do rather than handle a school shooter situation. So what Emoji got out of the lecture was, if there was a school shooting and a student wasn't in the classroom, the student had to find the nearest door and magically break the locking system before calmly exiting the school, which would be screeching at full volume because of the alarm system. Then, run as fast as they could to the restaurant without calling for help, unless a bullet or exhaustion got to them first. Not a problem we have in Australia.
When Spinal Palm was at school, he was sitting at the office waiting to be picked up from school. The office assistants were sitting quietly doing their work. However, after about 5 minutes, one of them stood up and shouted at the other, "Fuck you, Karen, I'm quitting!" Everyone stared at her while she continued to go around to everyone in the room and shout different things at them like, "Linda, you're a fucking whore! And if you had my breast, Susan, maybe you'd still have a husband!" When she turned to Spinal Palm, she realized he was a student and that she had messed up big time. Her face went red and she walked silently out of the room.
One day, Gergak was leaving his girlfriend's place at 1 in the morning. He then tried to call her to see if he had left his sunglasses there. His mom was right next to her on the list, and his big thumb accidentally pressed his mother by mistake. She answered, and apparently she had a question for him anyway. She and the rest of the family were playing Game of Things, and the card she pulled asked, "What should you not do in public?" Gergak was so tired, and he blurted out, "Masturbate." Apparently his mom had the phone on loudspeaker and didn't warn him. His dad, siblings, and his uncle were all there to hear it. Not one family member lets him forget it to this day.
Animation's older sister has a pug named Jojo, which she loves very much, but Jojo is lazy. While most dogs love going for walks, Jojo will only walk a little bit before he gives up and lies down. To solve this problem, Animation's sister bought a stroller for Jojo, but it wasn't just a normal puppy stroller. It was a one-of-a-kind vintage baby stroller that cost half her paycheck. Now when they go for walks, Jojo gets pushed around in his own luxury stroller. The people around town have started gossiping about the crazy woman who pushes her pooch around like a baby.
The dumbest thing Honeybits ever saw someone fight over was an egg roll. While she was eating her lunch one day, Honeybits noticed 3 really fat girls asking a fellow student for his egg roll. All 3 of them asked for it at once. But instead of coming to a rational conclusion, the girls argued until a big fight broke out between them. The cafeteria monitor immediately jumped into the fray of flailing fists, but one of the girls picked him up and slammed him onto the ground. It took the administrators and some other members of the staff to break it up. Even then, each of the 3 girls struggled to get back at each other. Honeybits still can't believe all that fuss was over a greasy egg roll. Spinal Palm and his friends celebrated his birthday by going to a local bar, but were kicked out because the bartender figured that Spinal Palm and his friends were underage. So, they went to a store where they paid a guy $100 to buy them 5 bottles of whiskey and 5 bottles of wine. While they were walking home, Spinal Palm and his friends began to drink. By the time they walked onto the street, they had drank almost all of the bottles. Spinal Palm was walking on all 4s when he saw his house. He tried to unlock the door, but his key didn't fit. He then saw a cat flap and thought,
When did I get a cat?
figuring it would be a good idea to crawl through the cat flap, Spinal Palm crawled through it but got stuck midway. He cried for help, and then saw a couple storming down the stairs.
Mom, Dad, is that you?
It wasn't his parents, and needless to say, Spinal Palm and his friends stayed overnight at the police station.
When Hellbent was 12, he was watching television at his friend's house. His friend interrupted him and said, "Hey, your dad called," while holding the phone in his hands. Hellbent was confused why his dad would call because he had only been there for about 30 minutes. His friend added, "He said your grades are down, so you have to go home." Out of rage, Hellbent took the phone from his friend and yelled,
What the fuck, Dad? I've only been here for 30 minutes! Why couldn't you check my grades before I left?
After Hellbent finished yelling into the phone, he looked towards his friend who was on the ground dying with laughter. Hellbent was confused and said, "Hello?" into the phone. A shocked guy stuttered, "Sir, that's not a pizza topping." After he heard him, Hellbent immediately said sorry and hung up, and then glared at his friend. His friend had called Jet's Pizza and asked for a cheese pizza, and when the guy asked for toppings, he had given the phone to Hellbent.
Gergak was with his sister and brother on a school field trip. Suddenly, the bus shook violently and all the students were instantly screaming and some were even crying. Gergak held his brother and sister close, hoping it wouldn't happen again. The bus driver stopped the bus, and as soon as they stopped, a dude in a clown costume broke through the back door. Gergak instantly pulled his brother and sister out of the seat and dragged them closer to the front because they were sitting in the very back. Gergak was running so quickly that his brother got some scrapes on the back of his legs from being dragged. As soon as everybody was off the bus, Gergak called the police. When they were going home on the same bus, the clown somehow broke into the same bus again. After that, they filed out and Gergak called 911 again. After that, they never saw him again. The dumbest thing Nixiom ever saw was when he was at a 7-Eleven with one of his friends. His friend wanted to buy a candy bar, so he took it up to the register. The lady told him it would be $1.18. Nixiom's friend pulled out 2 $1 bills. He was about to hand them over to the lady when he stopped himself and put the dollar bills back in his wallet. Nixiom watched as his friend took out a $5 bill and said, "This should be just enough." He handed the bill to the lady, who stared at him in confusion. He clearly wasn't trying to break a 5 or something smart like that. Nixiom wasn't sure what made his friend think a little candy bar would cost nearly $5.
The dumbest lie Dolan tried to get away with was when he was in school. Back then, he had a bad stutter that stopped him from raising his hand during class. One day, a little kid asked him why he spoke so strangely. Dolan answered,
Oh, my parents were kidnapped by aliens, and they had their tongues ripped out, so it was hard for them to speak, of course. Then when I was born, my parents passed it on to me. So now it's hard for me to speak.
The little kid went around to his other little friends and told them Dolan's story. It went on for 2 or 3 years until he found out it was fake.